Welcome to Plain Living. My name is Kim, and today I want to show you how to make these fabric jar and bowl covers. I use them for my sourdough starter, for banneton baskets, for fermenting things like sauerkraut or sprouting grains. They make a great gift to put on things that you've canned at home to put over the lids, and you can even use the bigger sizes to cover bowls of things that you want to take to a gathering or throw in the fridge. So let's get to it. Today I'm going to show you how to make your very own fabric jar or bowl cover. You will need some quilting cotton. This is great for fat quarters, a contrasting or coordinating thread, a good pair of fabric scissors, or you can use your rotary cutter and a mat. Then you'll need some pinking shears, which is this sort of zigzag cut scissor. If you don't have these, you can just use your regular scissors and cut slits or notches. You'll need some clips or pins. I prefer clips, but straight pins are totally fine. And then you'll need some household items like plates or bowls that are a perfect circle to trace your patterns. Then you'll need some 1/4 inch elastic. So let's just get started. You're going to spread your fabric out. I'm going to leave mine folded in half just like it came off the bolt. So here I have 2 layers of fabric. You will need 2 pieces of the exact same size and shape for each jar cover or bowl cover that you want to make. So I'm going to put my plate down and I'm going to just cut all the way around it with my rotary cutter. Just use it as a template. It's a little bit difficult to use a rotary cutter when you're cutting curves, especially something like a plate where you're trying to use this template and keep it still. And then if you're familiar with rotary cutters, it can be difficult to kind of cut back towards yourself or get all the way around an item just because of the ergonomics of how you hold the rotary cutter. But that's okay. Just get these circles cut out. Again, you need 2 pieces for each cover that you're going to make. And so I'm going to do a couple of different sizes here so that we can see what fits each different thing. If you don't have a rotary cutter or if you just don't like using it in a circle like this, you can take your plate or whatever object you're using and you can just trace it with a fabric pen or a pencil onto the fabric and then cut it out with your regular scissors. And I think that's actually what I'm going to go ahead and do with this bowl. This bowl is such a small curve. I think it's going to be very difficult to cut with a rotary cutter, especially since I was already having a problem with that. So I'm going to take this bowl. I'm just going to trace it with a number 2 pencil. And I'm not going to worry about leaving the marks here because that's going to end up inside of our seam allowance and it's not going to show anyway. So I'm going to trace really good all the way around. And then I'll take my fabric scissors and that'll be a lot easier to cut out accurately and not have to worry about the bowl moving around or being able to maneuver my hands around to be able to cut it. This is a great project to use with scraps or fat quarters because it doesn't really take up a whole lot of fabric. You could also mix and match this. It doesn't have to be the same on both sides, so it could almost be reversible or double-sided if you wanted to mix up the fabrics you use. It'd be a great scrap buster, and it's a great way to get some gifts for people without having to spend a whole lot of money on anything. Another option is if you're anything like me and you do any sourdough baking, or if you want to gift some sourdough items to someone, is to create a banneton cover for proofing dough or for just covering the banneton when it's not in use or whatever. Obviously, this is not a perfect circle, so I'm just going to put the basket directly on the fabric upside down, and I'm just going to cut freehand about 2 to 3 inches all the way around the perimeter of the basket. It doesn't have to be perfect because when we install the elastic, it's going to scrunch up the fabric and any imperfections are going to get lost in that gather. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it, freehand this, give myself that extra border all the way around. And this is going to allow me to create a cover for a bowl that is not a perfect circle. And it'd be a really cute addition to a gift set with some jar covers to also have this oval shaped banneton cover. And you can see here how it will fit over it. It drapes down the side all the way around. The first thing we want to do is make sure that our directional fabric is all going the same way. This is not really a big deal. It's just a little detail that I like to make sure of. So I'm going to make sure my chickens go the same direction on both sides. And then I'm going to put them pretty sides touching. So the first piece is the pretty side up, or the part of the fabric that we want to see. And then the top one is pretty side down. And then I'm going to mark myself an opening right here so that I can sew all the way around this oval except for between these two marks. And that's going to leave an opening where I can turn it right side out once I've got the first seam sewn. And then I'm going to clip all the way around the outside. And on something curved like this, I use a lot of clips or pins because this is going to tend to shift on you as you rotate it through the machine. So don't be shy with your clips. We're going to get all that clipped together, and I'm going to go ahead and do all of them at once, sort of like an assembly line, so that I can get through things faster. But we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put the first one face up, check the direction of our print, see my chickens are face up and they're upright. I'm going to put this one pretty sides down, or where the chickens are faced down on the table. I'm going to mark my opening here. That's where I'm not going to sew. And then I'm going to clip all the way around to hold those pieces together so that they don't shift. I'm going to continue to do this to all of the different pieces until I have all of my jar covers ready to sew. Now you need to set up your machine. So go ahead and either fill a bobbin or find a bobbin with matching thread to whichever thread color you picked. And go ahead and get your machine threaded. I'm not going to give super detailed instructions here because every machine is different. And I'm assuming you have some basic sewing skills before you start this. You can check out my Learn to Sew series where I have some long form videos that give very detailed instructions on what to expect, some troubleshooting on threading your machine, and then step-by-step instructions on how to do that. Like I said, every machine is different, so check your manual or search for your specific model on YouTube to learn how to thread it. But we're going to get this threaded, and I'm going to use this red thread. It is, I guess it's kind of a coordinating thread and a contrasting thread because it does match the combs on the chickens in the fabric, but it's also going to be a contrast on all of the sort of cream and white colors on the fabric. It's going to stand out. But again, because the elastic is going to gather all the edges up, your stitches are going to get lost in the folds anyway. For this first seam that we sew, we want a 2.5 length stitch, and it's just going to be a straight stitch. And I try to keep my needle in the center position, and I'll use the edge of my presser foot as my seam allowance guide. So I'm going to sew starting at my first mark, back stitch, and then all the way around the circle, stopping at my second mark and back stitching so that I leave that 2 to 3 inch opening to turn it right side out. Just really take your time on this and be careful because as you're doing this rotation with the fabric, it tends to shift. So take your time, sew a few stitches. Every time you take a pin or a clip out, just go ahead and rearrange the fabric. Make sure it's all lined up really nicely. And like I said, use just the edge of your presser foot or about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance here. Work your way around. And I want you to pay close attention to how I'm moving my hands here. My left hand is on top of the fabric, rotating my wrist to keep that circle moving around. And then my right hand is adjusting the layers of fabric, keeping it lined up where I want it. So let me show you this a little bit closer. As you rotate your fabric, you'll see that I'm just putting my hand there and rotating my wrist. This edge over here of the circle is staying in the same position, and that's where I'm going to line it up with the edge of my presser foot. So you see here, I'm using my left hand just to rotate, and I'm using my right hand just to keep everything perfectly lined up with the edge of the presser foot and make sure that I'm feeding this fabric in for that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And just go slow and take your time and keep everything lined up very nicely here. And don't forget to backstitch at the end because when we turn this right side out, we're going to be tugging on the ends of these seams quite a bit and we don't want to pull our threads loose. So just do a couple of back stitches when you come to that first mark that you drew there. I'm going to go ahead and continue this same process on all of my jar covers to sew the two pieces of fabric together on each one. Now, before we turn this right side out, we want to trim our threads, and then where the opening is, we want to leave that seam allowance there, but the rest of the way around, we want to use our pinking shears and cut off all of this excess fabric. It's going to make our curves lay a lot smoother. And if you don't have pinking shears, don't worry about it. I'll show you a way you can do this with just your regular fabric scissors. Take your time with this because you don't want to accidentally cut your threads that you just stitched in. but you do want to get the bulk of this fabric removed. You don't want to have all that extra fabric trying to fold into a smaller curve on the inside of the fabric. So let's do this next one. I'm going to use my regular fabric scissors, trim those threads off, and instead of actually zigzag cutting those shapes out, we're just going to make little slits that will allow the fabric to sort of slide over itself, because you are creating smaller chunks of fabric that will be able to move and overlap each other. So you're essentially doing the same thing. You're allowing more fabric to fit into that smaller space inside the curve. So just work your way around like this, cutting little slits in with the tip of your scissors right up to the thread, but be careful not to cut through your seam. And let's give some props to Seth, my 9-year-old, who helped me film this because we could not find all the pieces to our GoPro and I left my tripod in the camper. So go ahead and do this either with your pinking shears or with your scissors to all your jar covers, and then we will get these turned right side out. Now, in order to do that, you're going to find the opening that you left, and then I like to take my thumb, stick it inside the hole, and scrunch all the fabric down over my thumb, and then take my hand and basically turn the entire thing right side out by unfolding my hand from the inside of the fabric. And you want to run your fingers along the inside of the seam to push that curve out and get all of that fabric to lay right on the inside. So just go ahead and take your time to kind of scrunch all the way around the entire curve. And you can go back and top stitch this if you want. I like to just top stitch the opening closed. So I'm just going to smooth this out, and then I'm gonna find that opening, I'm gonna put my thumbs or my fingers inside and tug, and when you do that, the fabric is naturally gonna roll over and tuck into the seam allowance. So you can see there, you almost can't even tell where my opening is. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn all of these right side out and make sure that all of my seams are pushed out. And you do them all the exact same way. You're just gonna scrunch it up, turn it right side out, and then make sure that all of those curves are pushed out so that your seam is completely pushed out onto the edge of the two pieces of fabric. Now, sometimes the edges are a little bit difficult to get them to lay right on a curve. So what you need to do is lay this flat on a table, and then take your fingers and feel for the seam allowance up inside of there. And you're gonna pull it back towards you and then roll out towards the edge. And you can see how that's pushing all of the fabric all the way out to where that seam is. Go ahead and do that to all of your pieces, and make sure that you have all of your openings tucked under. And depending on your confidence with the iron, you can pin or clip these little flaps shut. Or if you think that you can just use your fingers and use the iron to get a nice crisp edge there, you don't have to do that. I like to clip mine in place just so that they don't move around on me. And then we're going to take this to the ironing board, and we're going to get everything pressed out nice and neat all the way around the edges, but especially that opening, so that we can almost create an invisible closure there when we top stitch over it, and you'll never know that we left a hole when we originally sewed it. So roll all of those seams out and just give it a nice good press with a hot iron. And I'm gonna hit the middle as well because they do tend to get a little bit wrinkled when you turn them right side out. We're gonna take this back to the sewing machine and just top stitch where that opening was, back stitch at the beginning and the end. And I'm gonna use about an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance here, so very close to the edge, but far enough into the fabric to make sure that I catch all of those flaps. Now on this step, if you want to top stitch all the way around the entire circle, you can certainly do that. I find that it's not really necessary because it's not going to be noticeable once the fabric is gathered up. So it's up to you. You can put that extra touch on there, or if you're using that contrasting thread and you just really want that extra pop of color, go ahead and top stitch all the way around. But you can see here how I'm putting the edge of the fabric almost in the center of my presser foot instead of over at the edge of it. And I'm just trying to get that needle as close to the edge of the circle where I'm still going to sew through all 4 layers of fabric to close the opening. Now we're ready for the final step, so we're going to grab our elastic, and we're not going to cut this down to size until after we sew the elastic on. So I'm going to leave the roll of elastic here, and on my oval, I want to start on the straight edge, and on the straight edges, I'm only going to stretch the elastic a little bit. But on the rounded edges, I'm gonna stretch the elastic almost as far as it will go because I want it to be a little bit tighter fitting on those short ends than I do on the straight edges. That's just how the bowl is shaped, my Banneton basket. So I'm going to put this jar cover with the fabric up under my presser foot and the elastic up under the presser foot. And I'm going to use a wide and long zigzag stitch, so about a 5 millimeter wide and 2 millimeters long. I'm going to take a few stitches over the elastic to hold it in place. And then to stretch it, I'm going to use my left hand to move the fabric through. And with my right hand, I'm going to stretch that elastic out. So with my left hand, I'm pushing the fabric through a little bit as I put tension on the elastic. And if you look over behind my machine, you can see that it is starting to scrunch up and gather that fabric. Now, when I get to the curve right here, that's when I'm going to start pulling my elastic a little bit tighter because we want it to scrunch up and gather more on the ends. So I'm gonna about double it in length as I pull. And then when you pull this hard on the elastic, you're gonna have to use that left hand to keep your fabric going through, because the harder you pull on the elastic, it's naturally gonna want to pull everything back out of your machine. And just take your time, keep adjusting things, move things around as you go. Make sure you're not accidentally getting the rest of the project tucked up under your needle. And you're gonna use that same rotation with your left hand to keep this moving around in a circle. And here's a better shot of my right hand, how I'm putting a good bit of tension to stretch that elastic out. When you get back to the beginning of your elastic, you want to overlap it maybe a quarter of an inch and then back stitch, and then you just trim off your elastic. And that's it. That's all it takes. Now you've got a jar or bowl cover that will fit over a mason jar or a banneton. You can make a little sourdough gift for somebody like this with some starter and a banneton basket with a cover. Also, head over to plainlivinghome.com where I've got a photo tutorial and a step-by-step guide. And go ahead and sign up for our email list so we can be email friends. I'll send you all of my newest tutorials and my favorite recipes. Comment down below if you're interested in a casserole carrier tutorial. This one is fully insulated for hot or cold. It'll hold a standard pie plate, an 8x8 casserole, or a 9x13 casserole, or your serving bowls. It keeps your food hot or cold with the full insulation, and then you have a nice little way to tote your food to the potluck. If y'all are interested in this, I'll create a tutorial for the casserole carrier, and let me know down below what you would like to create a cover for out of this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and make sure you check back soon for our next sewing tutorial, sourdough recipe, or simple living life hack.